anytime we listen to a story or read something, we don't really get the full meaning, the purpose of the story until we get to the end. It's the end that makes the whole plot of the thing make sense. Without that, we see the pieces and we might be able to predict sometimes how they come together. But once we see the conclusion, we see how the whole thing fits together, and the things that maybe confused us or annoyed us or aggravated us, we see how they fit into the bigger picture. I think we just naturally want to put things in to see how they fit together in this bigger picture. It's true for a lot of things, most stories, and it's true for a lot of truths of our faith and a lot of the stories that we see in the Bible. For example, Jesus, the whole point of his life, although he did a lot of incredible things throughout the entirety of his life, we don't see the full point of everything that he did until the very end, until his death and resurrection, to see that the purpose of his whole coming as man was to rise from the dead, to conquer death and to save us from sin. We see that even like in the whole story of the Bible as a whole, we see the whole point of it, really, the end of it makes sense. The book of Revelation is not about all the things that are going to happen when the world is coming to an end. The point of the book is really at the end, not how God is going to create a new world, but that God will create a new world with no more sin, no more death, no more suffering. We will be together with him for eternity in heaven. The point of Lent that we begin this week is not so much the suffering, the temptation, all these things that we usually associate with Lent, but rather the point of it is at the end, Easter, that all of this has a greater purpose to unite us to the Lord, to conquer sin and death in our own lives and experience the joy of resurrection. That's why we're doing these things in the first place. Each year, as we begin the season of Lent, every year we hear the story in the gospel of Jesus' temptation in the desert, where he goes to spend 40 days in the desert of fasting and of undergoing temptation, to symbolize that that's what we're doing. This week we start 40 days of entering into our own deserts, entering into prayer, penance, and sacrifice to be with the Lord so that we can experience new life with him, to prepare ourselves to receive that gift. Each year, though, in the first reading, usually the first reading in the gospel has some kind of connection. But the season of Lent, the first readings take a little bit of a different spin. Rather, it walks us through the whole story of salvation from beginning to end to show us the real purpose of the meaning of Lent. This year, our first reading is the end of the story of Noah and the flood, where, like all these other stories, the purpose of Noah is not the flood or the 2x2 animals or the ark or all these things that we usually first think of when we think of Noah and his story in the Bible. The purpose of that entire passage is what we hear today in our first reading. That after all of that takes place, God says some incredible words to Noah. I establish today a covenant with you. Everything that God has done from that point at the very beginning of the scriptures has been him remaining faithful to that covenant. Everything that God has done has been in accord with the promise that he made to Noah on that day. That God, as God said to Noah, I make a covenant with you that I will remain faithful to forever. He wants to remind us that he says those same words to us. I will make a covenant with you. I promise to choose you and to claim you as my son and as my daughter. And no matter what happens from that day forward, I will remain faithful to that. No matter how bad it may get, no matter how hopeless it may seem, no matter how heavy the weight may feel in the moment, I will be faithful to you. Think about Noah. He was literally, him and his family were the only people in the entire world who remained faithful to God. That's like 8 people in the whole world remained faithful. Like, you don't get much more hopeless than that. Yet what God proves through his actions with Noah is that no matter how deep and dark and hopeless it may seem, I can triumph, I can overcome, and I can bring redemption to what seems irredeemable. No matter how big the failure in our own life may seem, God can bring newness out of that. No matter how persistent the temptation may feel to turn away from the Lord, to seek the things that are apart from him, every time we come back, he says, I will welcome you, I will receive you, and I will remain faithful to you. I think a lot of times the trap that we can fall into the season of Lent is to really focus more on ourselves, to make it about me, what I can do, what I need to grow in. The focus becomes on it's like a self-help or a self-fix-it project. I need to fix these things that I don't like about myself, so I'm going to fast from this or read this devotional or do this book or go to this prayer session or whatever it is. It becomes about me trying to make myself better. when I think the first reading actually gives us a very helpful key to enter into the season of Lent with. It's less about my own growth and more about his perfect faithfulness. I think we succeed, so to speak, in the season of Lent, not when we kill our penances and give up all kind of things and make it to the end without failing. We really succeed in the season of Lent when I recognize how weak I actually am and how good God is when he meets that weakness. When I can come before the Lord in poverty and weakness and even in failure, yet remaining confident that God will be faithful to the covenant that he made with me at my baptism. I will choose you and I will always choose you. Teaches us not to rely on ourselves and how good we are, because at best that's going to be a house of cards. Because when we experience failure, that whole thing comes crumbling down, and what I thought was a firm foundation really isn't quite so firm. The only firm foundation that we have is him and his faithfulness. And entering into the season of Lent is about focusing on that, how good and how faithful he will be, even though my Lent might be a total failure. The way that God looks at me and the way that God responds to me will never change. That's the point of the season of Lent. Not us transforming ourselves and making ourselves better, but recognizing how little I can do on my own and how much God can do when I give him permission to, when I give him the space to let him transform me. As we enter into the season of Lent, whatever you're giving up, whatever your Lenten plan looks like, maybe you don't even have a Lenten plan yet and it kind of caught you by surprise and man, I'm already here and I don't know what to do. That's perfect because I'm not relying on myself, but all I can do is rely on him and let him prove to me again how faithful he will always be to me.